Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, I had a voice for radio. So today, we're going to be looking at a very interesting new supporter card coming out in Fairy Rise in Japan at the moment. It's Morty, not that Morty, this Morty. And it's quite a nice little Disruption supporter. Now, we don't actually know how we're getting Fairy Rise. My bet is still that we're going to be getting a mini set a la Dragon Majesty, but there is absolutely no confirmation whatsoever. This is one of those ones where we're just going to have to, wait and see, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, it should come as no surprise to you, lovely ladies and gentlemen, that the translation here has been provided by the lovely David Hochmann over at limitlesstcg.com/translations. And what it does, you can only play this card if one of your psychic Pokemon got knocked out during your opponent's last turn. Look at your opponent's hand, choose 2 cards you find there, and shuffle them into their deck. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a lovely little Disruption card, which if played at the right time, could be absolutely devastating. This is a kind of card where as long as you play it at the right time, you could well end up winning the game there and then. Now, to put this in perspective, a supporter card that saw quite a lot of play back in the SP era was Cyrus's Initiative, which read flip 2 coins. If either of them is heads, look at your opponent's hand. For each heads, choose 1 card from your opponent's hand and put it on the bottom of your opponent's deck in any order. Now, technically with Cyrus, you put it at the bottom of their deck, meaning they were less likely to draw into it unless they played some kind of search card that made them shuffle their deck, whereas this shuffled into their deck and they could draw it next turn. But other than that, you're basically looking at the same thing. And anyone that was playing Cyrus's Initiative back in the day knows that if you hit a double heads on this, you could often end up winning the game in fairly short order. Now, this used to be played with Sableye. And the reason it was played with Sableye is because for 0 energy, which is always nice, you got to search your deck for a supporter card and use it, essentially. That was quite nice. And people used to do this on turn 1. So they would impersonate Osiris's Initiative turn 1 to try and make sure your opponent didn't have a good start. Now, to be fair, this cannot be used just as is. Your opponent must have taken a KO during their turn, and similarly, it must have been a KO on a psychic Pokemon. Now, a couple of quick ruling things. It says KO. So if it's knocked out by damage counters, if it's knocked out by damage, if it's knocked out by an ability, think something like a Decidueye, this is all fine and dandy. But please remember that Poison and Burn are put on between turns. So if a Pokemon was KO'd by Poison or Burn, you didn't have a Pokemon KO'd during your opponent's last turn. You had it KO'd between turns. This is the same ruling we have with teammates. If your Pokemon is knocked out by Poison or Burn, you don't get to use this card. But let's say you do get to use this card. Let's say you look at your opponent's hand, and their hand is 2 basic energy, a stage 1, a Cynthia, and a Zebstrika to evolve up that Blitzel on their bed. Zebstrika's a new one that's got an ability. Once during your turn, you may discard your hand and draw 4 cards. Well, you shuffle back in the Cynthia and Zebstrika, and they're left with a stage 1 and a couple of energy. And at that stage, they might not actually have enough to win the game. You might end up locking them out of any consistency cards for turn after turn after turn after turn after turn, and then you win. And that's kind of the aim here. This isn't going to be a card where you drop it and instantly win the game. If your opponent's got a hand of 10 cards after a big wheel GX, the chances of you being able to pick the 2 perfect cards to win the game is going to be very slim. That doesn't mean you can't use it after a big wheel GX. It just means that even if you get rid of 2 of their cards, they'll still have a hand of 8. They'll probably have something else. But let's say, for argument's sake, they've got a Zoroark, and they desperately need to get a double colorless energy in order to take their prize next turn. Or let's say they need a double colorless energy and a Guzma in order to win the game. What you can do here is get rid of that Guzma in the hand, or get rid of that Tapu Lele in the hand, or get rid of that Ultra Ball for a Tapu Lele. You get rid of the 2 cards they need the most. Maybe they'll still draw into what they need, and if that happens, that happens. There's nothing you can do about it. But if there's a particular combo they need to win the game, this might do it. I mean, your opponent might already have that double colorless energy in their hand. But you know what? This gets rid of it, and maybe they draw into it, but maybe they don't. Now at this stage you might be thinking, hang on a second, Wassy, can't we just use Judge? Couldn't we just use a Judge here to disrupt them? If we think they've got cards we'd rather they didn't have, can't we just use a Judge? And the answer is, if they've got 6 or more cards in hand, yes. Yes, you can just use a Judge. Because if you use a Judge, they'll go from 6 cards down to 4. They'll have a new hand, so you've essentially taken the cards you want out of their hand while leaving them with 4 cards. But if they've got 5 or fewer cards in hand, then all of a sudden Morty becomes better than Judge, because now you're leaving them at a lower hand size. Let's say they've got 3 cards in hand. Playing this allows you to shuffle 2 of those cards back, leaving them with only 1 card in hand, and you're going to leave them with the worst possible hand. Whether that's an escape board when they're not going to need to retreat, whether that's a basic energy when they don't really need that many basic energy at the moment, I don't know. But you are going to do the thing which gives them the greatest chance of having nothing next turn. Whereas if you play a Judge when they've got a 3 card hand, then you're going to disrupt them. You're going to get rid of what they've got, but you're then going to give them a 4 card hand. That is far from ideal. You're actually giving them a card advantage, though with different cards. One of the best parallels we've got here is Delinquent. Delinquent is a great card, which will still be legal after rotation, whereby you discard a stadium in play, and your opponent discards 3 cards from their hand. And there's several reasons why you may wish to use this over Delinquent. First of all, there might not be a stadium. The thing with Delinquent is, if there's no stadium in play, you're not going to be able to use this, which means you end up in this super awkward position of either hoping your opponent plays a stadium, which is far from ideal, or having to play a bunch of stadiums yourself, which is far from ideal. Because if you're not playing a bunch of stadiums and your opponent doesn't play down any stadiums, then essentially you can't use Delinquent. And that's super, super awkward, because it means that Delinquent's no longer kind of a 1-card tech in your hand, it's a many card tech in your hand. One of the great things about all these supporters at the moment is you can always just go, drop a Tapu Lele, and then use it. Or search out with an Ultra Ball, and then play it down and just use it. It's a really good tool we've got to make sure we've always got these supporter cards that we want. Problem is, Delinquent can't always be used like that. Delinquent, there's got to be a stadium. If your opponent's got a 3-card hand, obviously using Delinquent to discard all 3 of them will be optimal. They get discarded rather than shuffled back into their deck, so they can't use them later unless they recover them. And sometimes that's fine. If it's a Pokemon, your opponent can just play a Rescue Stretcher to recover it. That's all well and good. But if you get rid of their special energy, there's no special charge anymore. So all of a sudden, they're in a situation where they are completely screwed. Morty doesn't do that. Morty doesn't get rid of cards and discard them. It doesn't get rid of more than 2 cards. Here's the thing, though. If you want to know how good Morty can be, the next time you're playing a game of Pokemon cards, every turn or 2, look at your hand and imagine your opponent had a chance to remove the 2 best cards in your hand, the 2 cards you needed the most, and put them back into your deck. Imagine how much that would annoy you. Because that's what Morty does. The reality is, Cyrus's initiative saw a lot of play, so this will. Delinquent saw a lot of play, so this will. It's only really good for Psychic decks, but the thing to remember is that pretty much every deck is playing Tapu Lele at the moment, and Tapu Lele is a Psychic Pokemon, so there is every opportunity here to use this in any deck. The problem is you end up in a situation where you can only use it after your Tapu Lele gets KO'd. That's not to say you shouldn't play it, but it is to say in a Psychic deck you can just be dropping it all the time whenever you feel like it, whereas in any other deck it's kind of that turn your Tapu Lele gets KO'd. Not useless, but not the easiest card ever to use. I'm going to be giving Morty 4 Wassies. I think it's a very exciting card that could be pretty fun. I think it's good disruption, and I am absolutely convinced that a number of people will be playing it in decks moving forward into the next format. I think it's good. I think it's going to see a lot of play. But I want to hear from you guys. Do you think it is that good? Do you think people just play Delinquent instead? Were you playing when Cyrus's Initiative was seeing play? And do you remember how good that card was? Go nuts, but remember the rule. Be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at the Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all of that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves. Until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.